Well, hi everyone. My name is Carson Whitenauer, and I serve as the executive director for Uncommon Pursuit. And I'm here today with Lori Anne Thompson, and she is a survivor and a storyteller. To give you some context for this conversation, she was abused and bullied and traumatized in awful ways by my former employer and my childhood hero, Ravi Zacharias. And not only was she up against Ravi, but also the full force of the ministry he founded, RZIM, including one of its billionaire board members and donors, Bill Wang. And in a great irony, Bill was just indicted by the government here in the United States for racketeering and other charges. And racketeering is the kind of lawsuit that Ravi uh, had against Lori Ann and her family to coerce them into an NDA and into silence. And Margie Zacharias, Ravi's widow, continues to uphold that injustice against the Thompsons, has not released them from it despite being asked for that. So this story is not yet over, and it's a really heavy story. For me, I was convinced when I first learned about this. I was convinced by Ravi and the board of directors and by the senior leaders of the ministry that the due diligence had been done, this had been thoroughly looked into, and they were certain that Ravi was innocent and that Lori Ann and her husband were thieves, extortionists, liars, some of the worst people on earth. And so I had red flags available to me, and I looked at them and I ignored them. And I became responsible for slandering Lori Ann in my various circles and spreading falsehoods, very hurtful, painful falsehoods about her and her family. In the fall of 2020, more information became available, and I experienced a shockwave after shockwave of disappointment and anger and just numbness to realize how extensive the lies had been. And as I began to speak up for Lori Ann and for Ravi's other victims, I was just absolutely baffled by the bullying and the attempts to silence me from the senior leaders at the ministry. So, as we enter into this conversation, I'm just going to be open. I feel my weaknesses. I'm not an expert on this topic. I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing or saying something hurtful. But uh, Lorianne and I just wanted to have an honest conversation today and give you a snapshot of where we are in our process. I think we both hope that 10 or 15 years from now, we're able to have a much different conversation with a lot more healing in our lives. And I guess my main heart in all of this is that if you're listening and you have been through abuse, you would feel less alone. And that this might be a tiny step of healing in your journey. So it is pretty amazing, Lorian, that you and I are having this conversation. And that is a wild thing. And so I'd just like to give you some space to please introduce yourself however you'd like to.
Um, Carson, it's really great to be here with you. As you know, I'm really ambivalent about doing these sorts of things. When that Mr. Zacharias would do all of these kinds of things and do them publicly with wild audiences and lots of money, and so I'm really resistant to participating in what I feel might be a possible foray into celebrity culture or placing myself in a position of power over other people to unnecessarily or unduly influence other people. I really see myself as a peer to the survivor community, maybe a big sister, sometimes a mother. Have a big mother's heart, but I think that survivors themselves very often are the experts on their own experience, and I feel like I should be and want to be somebody who comes alongside and dwells with and empowers other people to find their own vocabulary, their own voice for what has happened to them. The trouble with abuse and abuse in religious circles or faith circles is that there's just so much commonality. And so when somebody can find words to speak the unspeakable things, I think that there's often a draw that says, oh my gosh, just exactly that. I'm not alone. Abuse, irrespective of where it happens, is isolating by its very nature. Offenders isolate their victims, myself notwithstanding. And so even post abuse, people are cut off from their communities. And so I guess my hope today, and I feel like, is that alongside of you, people will feel less alone. I know you indicated that the context of our conversation and even how we met in the first place, you're somebody I would just be friends with, even if it hadn't come about this particular way. But you and your colleagues, some of your incredible colleagues who eventually became very courageous and created a great deal of internal pressure, inspired change that isn't often seen in evangelical spheres. So there's that combination of external pressure that occurred, as well as internal pressure, and you were eventually part of that internal pressure that created a bit of an earthquake, didn't it? Uh, so, and as you indicated at the outset, things are still being uncovered, and I suspect we don't know the half of it, but much more has come to light than what I ever thought would be possible. To introduce myself, my name is Lori Anne Thompson. I'm a married mother to 4 children, 3 that I birthed and 1 I got for free. I'm a dog mom of Lewis, who's named after C.S. Lewis, and he was also named after the St. Louis Blues, who happened to win the NHL hockey game, or like the Stanley Cup, the year we got him. But I got the preferential spelling of his name, and I have been victimized from the time I was born until I met Mr. Zacharias and survived that catastrophic experience. And now I feel like I'm an overcomer, and that has been a gradual, slow crawl from what feels like a bit of abuse to a small patch of stable ground where I feel like I can mostly dwell in safety, I and my family. I hold a Bachelor of Science honors in kinesiology. I went back to school as a mature student after my last child was born and finished a degree I started years ago after life blew up. Life blew up several times. And then after 2017, I had to quit my career, and I eventually went on to do a master's in child advocacy and policy because I couldn't figure out what on earth was going on, and I certainly needed both therapeutic help, and I needed some information to empower me so that I could learn to protect myself and self-advocate. And so right now I work in a small clinical environment that I can manage. I work a couple days a week doing that, and I work as a victims intake worker for an attorney who does specialized work with sexual abuse victims. And so that's me. That's what I do. I'm a secret closet cook, and I like to move by way of recovery and help other people to move as well. I'm definitely still walking with a profound spiritual wound from childhood sexual abuse and re-victimization as an adult, and I am as one, like C.S. Lewis said in one of his books. I think it was the Reflections on the Psalms, where he said, "Look, guys, I'm not writing this book because I'm the expert. I'm writing this book because I'm a student." And sometimes there's things, when you're sitting down with your peers that you can maybe problem solve with, and better than if you're looking at a teacher. So I hope that that's the case for the vast majority of people who listen now or in the future, that we are as students, not as teachers today.
Mm. Thank you, Lori. And I'm so grateful for the resilience that you have been an overcomer and are an overcomer, and your life is gives me hope, and I know it gives others hope. And yet, you know, we want to have an honest conversation today. We're not an academic conference. We're talking about issues that have derailed your life, and I feel very much like I'm in the minor leagues, but this has knocked my life off course too, in unexpected ways. And As I've been thinking about this, I'm thinking, can't we have a superficial conversation? Like, can't we have like a polished conversation? And Can't we talk about somebody else? Um, this is a nerve wracking conversation. I'm worried about, again, of saying something hurtful or wrong, or just because I'm in process and I'm not an expert, but we promised an honest conversation. And so, uh, Lorian, for you, what does an honest conversation look like?
I feel as if there's somebody needs to give vocabulary to the profound wound that survivors experience in their own spirituality, irrespective of the faith discipline that they may have come from or they may be going to. And spirituality and religion can both be a place of healing, which I think most evangelicals would like it to be, uh, and it also can be a place of profound wounding, which we've seen in my own circumstance, your circumstance, and millions of other people. And so we have to acknowledge that sometimes the cure, which would be religion, uh, actually becomes the disease. And so how do we bring hope and peace and comfort when religion was used to crush the spirit of people? And I think it's really important. I think we do an injustice when we put a band-aid over that level of pain, uh, because when you crush the spirit, who can bear that? It's very difficult to bear. And when we paste religious stickers over top of profound puncture wounds, um, we end up with people who don't get healed, but and feel like they never will because there's no hope for them in this. Sorry, this is going to happen a couple times.
No, that's I kind of have at some point in my life kind of lost the ability to cry, which is a deficit of mine. But I feel a deep sorrow inside. Um,
I'll do it for you, don't worry.
okay, I mean, if I could ask a follow up on that, that I think is something that's often missed in this conversation, which is the original trauma of using religion to hook someone in and gain their trust in order to betray it and inflict damage. Then, when someone who's disconnected from that experience brings religion in as a band aid, and it then gets angry or disappointed that the band aid didn't help somebody, um, that second layer of trauma, and that could happen from dozens and dozens of you know Christians or religious leaders who maybe very sincerely want to help, but they're offering a Bible verse. They're offering and again, I'm all for the Bible, but what is the honesty that the church needs to hear? Maybe again, I know we're trying to be students here, but what is going on with that band aid response to the trauma that's so problematic?
It's very difficult to sit with. We in evangelical circles or Christian circles or whatever, we say that God is Emmanuel, Christ with us. And it is, we as human beings have difficulty tolerating the suffering and pain of other people. And we would like it to be better. We would like it to be better yesterday. I would like my own suffering and pain to be better yesterday, much less sitting with somebody else's. And healing is an incredible process. And I also believe that at least in Christendom, there's an awful lot of really spiritually immature individuals that have not walked through the developmental process of what it means to 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 dwell with, and all they can do is speak to. Um, and I think that's very concerning. And I don't have a direct solution for it other than to highlight it. And I think there are a couple things that can bring more authenticity into the conversation. And one is having a profound awareness of your own self, your own person. I think there's a separation between religion, spirituality, and psychology. An awful lot of psychologists are not people of faith. An awful lot of people of faith think psychology is bunk. And the reality is that, we're body, soul, and spirit, and the soul is the mind, the will, and the emotions. And so when the spirit is crushed, there's work to be done in the spirit. There's work for clergy or religious representatives to represent the heart of God and do so well, as that person understands it in their own faith tradition. And there's work to be done for in the soul, for soul care, and that can be done through trauma-informed therapists. And then, of course, we have a body, and most Christians think that that doesn't matter. And so, when we're only focusing on one aspect and we expect it to be liturgy, and we don't understand the liturgy of loss, and we don't understand the trifold aspects of a human being and the recovery process, then we're really only offering band-aids, and we are not looking at the whole. And additionally, I feel like that a great deal of religious leaders don't stay in their own lane. And so, you would never, if I had a heart problem, you would never offer me to come to your house and lie on your sofa and do open heart surgery. But unfortunately, when it comes to trauma, spiritual representatives will often believe that they can provide the singular source of healing for the body, soul, and spirit of a wounded individual, and they are absolutely wrong.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, and it's a bizarre idea, really, that if I just pray with you once for a couple of minutes and pat you on the hand, that's going to take care of it. And very few of us would want that for ourselves when we go through, the valleys. We want someone with us, and we want them to be able to offer real help. So I think your open heart surgery example is a great one. Lorianne, before we go any further, what are some of the other inauthentic, naive, or maybe they're sincere but still damaging ways you've seen this conversation take place?
I think one of the things we have to remember, is, in particular with people who have been abused in religious contexts, is that every single religious leader who sexually abuses or spiritually abuses or financially abuses somebody in their care uses Holy Writ, very often hymns, songs, movies, books, literature, stories, uh, you name it, it's pretty much all up for grabs. And so they sexualize the sacred, and they do so traumatically. And so, you can use vaccines as an instance, and I'm not anti-vax, but, you remember the Tuskegee schmozzle years ago, where people were injected with syphilis, and then that community of individuals eventually wouldn't trust anybody in the medical profession. Well, why would you?
Right.
Why would you take an injection? They injected you with syphilis. You have to think about clergy sexual abuse as something similar to that. We were injected with a disease, and the solution will not be in the same form. So perhaps if I was from the Tuskegee study, I might be able to take a vaccine in the form of an inhaler, and that wouldn't be triggering to me. And so understanding that people might be able to receive religious comfort or spiritual nourishment, but it probably is going to have to be in forms and fashions and packages and ways that they can tolerate, and that will not bring more symptoms for them. For instance, many clergy pray with their victims before they abuse them. They will tell their victims to focus on the cross that might be in the room. That they will use their own cognitive distortions to justify their abuse. You see, God intended us to be together. We're married in heaven. God has given me to you to heal your marriage. I will teach you how to be with a man, and therefore you can then go back to be with your husband in that fashion. Or if it's a child, God has then ordained me to be introduce you to sex and sexualities to prepare you for rigors of adulthood. Or this sexual experience has occurred, and it's occurred in this sacred place, and so therefore you're under confidentiality, or it's a sacred um, interaction, and therefore if you tell anybody, God will send you to hell. I mean, or the list goes on. I don't want to be triggering to anybody listening, but I mean, I have communicated some of the least egregious ways that spirituality can be used and religion can be used in the context of abuse. And so don't offer to pray with people. That's just flat out a bad idea. Most survivors will not have the courage to say no. Why? Nobody listened to the no in the first place. Why would they listen now? And people, in their effort to bring comfort and offer what they can, will offer the prescription of prayer, or Bible reading, or hymns, or worship, or whatever have you, and think that's what they have to offer, so that's what they're going to give. And that is probably not some of the things that are required for healing for the soul of that individual. Or when they are ready, when they can consent, let people ask for what they need, or just simply ask them, what do you need? How can I help? Sometimes the best apologetic is getting somebody groceries, or driving them to a medical appointment, or paying for the endless years of counseling that victims have to have in order to become functional again, or prescription medications. So there's a multitude of ways to express the heart of the Almighty without using religious language and symbols to do so.
And those those are actions that cost something and demonstrate love through the sacrifice of time or money or resources, and that is you know very different from what can be a very cheap answer to very profound twisting and very deep damage. And you know, some of this abuse lasts for years, and you know, so the recovery process. It's just very naive to think, well, we prayed about it. Let's move on. I know, Lorianne, some of the people who may be watching this are doing so because they've been abused, and they are watching this. I think maybe there's a sense for some of them. Hello, if that's you, um, is hope, a hope of recovery, a hope of wholeness. They may have a hope to reconnect with God. Maybe they don't want that, but they still would like to feel better and to be better. Um, One of the quotes you've really shared is the goal is worthy, the process excruciating. And I wanted to ask you if you would explain what you mean by that.
That quote isn't mine. First of all, it's on the top of my social media where I communicate on Twitter. But it's actually a screenshot of my of my therapist.
I did not realize that. I missed that.
No, there's no reference, but nobody has ever asked me for, and I don't take it as my own quote. It's there to remind me, okay, this is worth it, this is worth it, this is worth it. Even I need symbols often on a regular basis. Even coming to speak with you, Carson, is hard. I mean, this is hard. Because I'm not where I want to be, and I'm in a process, and I hope to God everybody else listening is also in a process, and nobody is at a final destination. I don't think. I think that I want to become what I wish other people had been for me, and so you can rail against what you wanted and didn't get, and that there's a time and a space for that, and then you have the choice to actually become what you wanted. And so that's a very difficult process to become mature, to become balanced, to become self-protective but open to others, to cast off the naivety of childhood and to accept things for the way they are instead of for the way that you wish they were, to not give way to fear but also walk in wisdom. That takes on a great deal of work, a great deal of interpersonal hard work, especially when you're coming from an abuse perspective, where your personhood was underdeveloped and your coping mechanisms were overdeveloped, and so that can feel, when you're walking through a recovery process, literally like you're dying all over again, except that it's a slow step back to life. And so that was with the therapist that I saw and still periodically see. She told me that the outcome of what I'm hoping to be, um, and to hoping to become, was worthy, but that the process was going to be excruciating. And I found that to be 100% accurate. And so, as leaders in anything, and I really don't consider myself a leader. If people do, then that's simply by accident. Um, but there are people who have walked ahead of the trail and can leave guideposts, and I hate even saying that word, but they can leave, little markers around trees to say, look, this is where we went, and careful for that cliff, because that can be a problem. And if you fall down there, it's going to take an awful lot of time to get back up, and watch out for the ticks, and here's the bug, repellent that I used, and all those things, like you're hiking on a trail or on a journey. I don't know where I was going. But essentially, it's just something that, as you're walking towards who you want to be and leaving behind what was, we talk in Christendom about forgetting the things that were behind. What's that scripture verse?
Um, Philippians
Right?
3. Yeah.
Can you quote the whole thing for me, or at least part of it? Just
Um,
paraphrase it.
Leaving behind and pressing on to what is ahead,
Right.
towards the heavenly goal that is in
Right.
Christ Jesus.
Right. Exactly. So as we whatever faith tradition that you want, there is a progression towards something more, something better, something deeper, something fuller, something higher, a higher mountain out of a lower valley. And in order to get there is a heck of a lot of hard work that has to happen. And so that's where that came from. And I can't tell or encourage anybody else to do hard things unless I have been willing to do really hard things myself. And you can tell when somebody says, yeah, that's gonna suck, but this is the only way through is through, and there's some credibility to that on the other side. But if you're not willing to do that work yourself, and you're only willing to give spiritual platitudes, then you better just be quiet.
Yeah, I'm still uh, grappling with some of those realities. I I see a counselor every 3 or 4 weeks because it's too much to go more often, and he's very compassionate, very knowledgeable. Actually, I think well trained in the area I've experienced. But I usually dread going to see him the whole week before, 3 or 4 days beforehand. I'll look at my calendar and go, "Oh no, it's happening this week," and it's such a good time, but it is often uncomfortable to be that vulnerable and to have my heart exposed in different ways and realize where I am and where I
Mm-hmm.
wish I was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's all kinds of compassion for that, right? There's all kinds of self-compassion for that. There's all kinds of compassion for that for others. But I have very little patience for people who, you know, give other people a map and send them on their merry way, and haven't walked through all those things themselves. So I'm proud of you for what it's worth.
Thank you. So, Lorianne, another topic we had discussed is, there's a lot of different kinds of abuse. I'm not able to list them all out, much less compare them. But in particular, spiritual abuse, so we're talking about a religious authority, um, uses that position to cause harm to someone else for some kind of benefit for themselves. And part of the trauma there is someone who was responsible to represent God in some sense. Obviously, they weren't God, but They were supposed to be a representative of God, and instead they represented evil. And it's while they were supposed to be representing God, I mean, there's a blasphemy in that. There's a sickness and a perversion in that. Um, I've shared with you that at RZIM, one of my passions was prayer, and I felt that for the sake of the ministry, we ought to have a daily prayer meeting at our headquarters. And we had chapel on Wednesdays, so but Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, a number of us would gather to pray for a substantial period of time. And to come to realize that I had been in all those hours, hundreds of hours of prayer meetings with people who were representing themselves to me as godly Christian leaders. And behind the scenes, they're working with a billionaire donor to fund a RICO lawsuit against you. It was just a incredible, I don't know the words for it, betrayal. And it really shattered my trust. And there were so many dimensions to how that messed me up because, sometimes the prayer request was to pray against the spiritual warfare that you and your husband represented. Um, and so there'd be prayers against, the work of Satan. Um, and I just shudder that I had an earnestness in those prayer meetings for the sincerity, I thought, of that request and the importance of praying against spiritual warfare. And, you've been very gracious in hearing and receiving my apology. I think it's amazing that we're having this conversation today, and I'm very grateful for our friendship. But even today, when I hear people praying, especially a pastor, I feel this coldness inside and an emotional distance. And I have to ask myself, what are they saying? How could this be used to manipulate me or others? What's the agenda in this prayer? Are they wanting to connect with God? Or are they trying to get a vote passed or, uh, do something else here? And it's very hard to be cynical and be open to God. So that's what's one thing I've been working through. And it's unfair to other people who have good hearts and who are just trying to pray. Um, so, Lorian, for you, well, that's our topic today. What have been the spiritual wounds of abuse?
Hmm. First of all, thanks for sharing that. I think that that's a common thing. Um, I your story is absolutely wild to me, having been the recipient of those prayers, and I know more than one victim who has been sort of darvoed in that way. That sort of that we become the offenders versus the offenders actually being the offenders. Um, and I think it's really brave of you. And there are numerous spiritual wounds, so make sure you come back to me. But is it okay if I address a couple other things I heard when you were talking? Um, in the Christian faith tradition, in the Christian Bible, it talks about two people who were praying publicly. One was the widow's mite, and what was the other one?
It just
I
goes
remember
ahead.
she said like so no, sorry, the widow's mite was something different. So one was the guy who said, thank you God that I'm not like other men, and
Yeah,
the other one was like, oh God, I'm a sinner and help me, and I'm a mess,
right.
um, and uh, and I think that one of the lessons that people such as yourself and even myself can glean is Jesus said less, not more, and and I think that when we educate ourselves about the human nature, and not just through a theological lens, but when we educate ourselves about human nature and personality disorders and red flags and narcissism and what does it mean to engage in hubris versus humility and good pride versus arrogance, that can make us very wise, and we can launch into a place of curiosity about public prayer, and public proclamation of anything. And truly, nobody research would tells us that nobody can really tell when somebody's lying. Maybe we think we can tell when our kids are lying, but some of my kids are better at it than others. Um,
It's so true.
some just really good at it. So so I think the goal is whether or not somebody's being earnest is less important as your own earnestness. You know, i'm I'm full out done believing in other people. Even Jesus didn't put his trust in men. Why? Because he knew exactly what was in them. And so at the end of all of this, I'm like, goodness, um I know now, unfortunately, more than I wished I had known about what men are capable of. And my main focus at this point in my own journey is become, what's inside of here, and still being able to observe um, other people, and have them earn my trust as opposed to it be bestowed. There's, in Christendom, we have a naive trust, a sense of which, you and I share, ascribe to at least a common faith platform, a common faith doctrine, or however you want to, not platform, but we have some commonality in how we see some of the world. And so there's a sense in which a naive trust between people of the same faith, that they're part of the same family, and that naivety can really lead to predation. And so, in a sense, some of what you've experienced is actually wisdom coming into your soul, right? Because as you go back on the situation that you've experienced, there's a whack load of red flags, but
Oh,
you
yeah.
didn't see them, right? And so you are becoming a student of not only others, but also yourself, and the potential of the human heart to deceive other people.
Yeah. Um, and that's, you know, a loss of innocence, right? Which is hard, but overdue. And um, uh, to, I wish it had been sooner, right? That I had thought, wow, prayer is this powerful gift from God. And so it will be a tool that people would use for evil. And I mean, Jesus was excoriating the Pharisees for their prayer life. He called them whitewashed tombs because their prayers looked so beautiful, but their hearts were cunning and wicked and evil. And it's all there. I'd read it, you know, so many times, but it hadn't been integrated into my way of being in the world.
Yeah, yeah. So we can know one thing on a theological level and live something very different in live out our theology very differently than that, and creates a cognitive dissonance that, and I'm that allows us the opportunity to grow when we see it. You know, you said that there's a loss of innocence, and innocence is the things of childhood. It's not the things of adulthood, right? I myself had an enormous amount of naivety and naive trust when I entered the Christian community. I entered the Christian community as a first generation Christian, after a lifetime of polyvictimization as a child. Left home at 15, came to a saving faith at around the age of 22. And experienced spiritual abuse and financial abuse in the church that I came to faith in, and thus was spiritually homeless. And that's how we ended up coming or interacting with Zacharias, because his material was on the radio station, which was free for all to access. And the wounds that are not only mine, but also I think universal wounds, literature would tell us that they're universal wounds of grief, of shame, of anger, of blaming God. If God is sovereign, then how come my father was a sexual predator? If God is sovereign, then how could anybody stand on stage and sexually abuse hundreds and hundreds of women, yet proclaim his name? Like, how do these things happen? How is Christendom and abuse even in the same sentence or the same headline, much the same reality? Um, there's a there's a profound betrayal trauma that occurs for people who have been abused, either by a religious professional or not, but in particular when it's by a religious leader. As you had indicated, those people do represent God, and Christendom itself is responsible for that. People are responsible for that. That's not how Scripture writes it, but that's how we've interpreted it, and that suits enormous amount of people very well, in particular the people with power. That pops up, or like that plumps up misogyny. It plumps up physical abuse of children. It plumps up marital rape. I mean, the list could just go on and on and on and on and on of how people can take Holy Writ, any Holy Writ, not just the Holy Bible, and use it for nefarious purposes. We have to remember that what was it in the desert? Satan quoted Scripture. Like, nobody preaches on this. Is really, really uncomfortable. And I'm not a preacher and I'm not a theologian, but I am a person who came to a saving faith believing these people were good. And I was drawn to it because I felt so defiled, because I was a survivor of sexual abuse, physical abuse, and I was unworthy. So where Christ said, all things are made new. Well, boy, did I never need to be made new again. I mean, he said, I will adopt you. I was orphaned. So there's so much that's available within Christianity, or within the faith in Christ, that somebody who's hungry and thirsty for righteousness, blessed are those from who mourn. Oh my gosh, I mourned my whole life through. Blessed? What? The wounds are profound, Carson, and here's where I've landed. Are you interested? Is there time to say that?
Oh yeah, there's not a yeah, of course.
Stories have always been important to me. I had a father who was a sex offender. People in the church came to our home and tried to help us. Several people did. They were the few small lights in an otherwise really dim existence. And they would bring Christmas presents or food when we didn't have any, or take us to church camp. And one of the things that the pastor at the time, when my father was incarcerated and my sister left, he said, if you just pray, everything's going to be okay. Well, I was 10 and I was pious, and I'm still pious. And I got on my knees every single night and stared at a picture of my sister who was gone. And I prayed my heart out. And nothing changed. And you can repeat that scenario in every other survivor's experience, whether it was frank abuse or the family not to implode, or God, why won't you stop this experience from happening? And those wounds, they're just profound. When I finally left home, I sought out the Anglican pastor, Reverend. His name is Father Gary Thorne, who would come to our home and help us. And he was a really good man. He's still a good man. I tracked him down where he was serving, and I asked him, if God is a God who lets people like my father go to heaven, then, give me some answers here. And he gave me the book, The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis. And I was 15 and I read it at the time, and I threw it in the shelf and said, well, that doesn't make any sense. And I don't know what he was saying. And the night that my father died I think I was 24. That night I was unpacking boxes of books into a place that I had moved into, and I had started reading the book again. And I was about halfway through the book, and I got a call that my father had died, which was a mercy. And I finally got the message of that the pastor was trying to say to me at the time, that all who are, should there be a heaven and a hell, that all who are there choose it. And stories have continued to provide a great deal of comfort for me. And as I've walked through this journey of recovery post 2017, the one story from C.S. Lewis's book in Narnia, I think it's The Silver Chair, where Puddleglum and the children and the White Witch are all underground, and the White Witch throws green powder on the fire, and everybody starts to get dopey and stupid, and she says, there is no sun, there is no moon, there is no grass, there is no, and she makes the mistake of saying Aslan, and they were like, yes, there is no sun, there is no moon, there is no, wait a minute, hold on, And Padaglam takes his big floppy foot and he stamps out the fire and says, I've seen the sun, I've seen the moon. And, even if there is no Aslan, I'm going to live in the pretend world. So even if it's all made up, I know, I've seen Aslan, I know he exists, but even if it's just all a fairy tale, that's where I want to be. And so I have more doubts than I have convictions and certitude. But even if it's all just a bunch of bunk, Jesus is still the best example of the finest example I can see, and I've looked a long time. And even if it's a bunch of hooey, that's where I'm going to stick with, because I can see the light in other people. I can even see the light in myself. I can see beauty. I can see spiritual principles at work, even through all this trauma. And so that's where I've landed.
Well, Lori Anne, thank you for sharing all of that. That's something I'm going to watch again, and I think others might listen to again to take in the spiritual wounds of abuse. Uh, and I just was feeling a lot of anger as you shared, anger at your father, anger at some of the people who tried to help and set you up for um, so much disappointment and emptiness. Just feeling a lot of anger as I heard about all of the things you were forced to endure because other people did what was evil or they failed to do what was right. And there's a profound cost to this that it's been a gift for you to help me and help others understand. And if you're listening with a tender heart and have the capacity to do things differently, I hope that you would hear what's just been shared and not just hear it as like entertainment or as a novelty, but as a prompt to change. Um, Lori Ann, you told me before the conversation that you wanted to talk about the difference between spirituality and religion.
Mm-hmm. I do.
And so I just wanted to give you space to explain what you see as the difference and how that's part of this conversation.
Social scientists define spirituality as the pursuit of the sacred, the transcendent, the more, the outside, the eternal being, and whatever people seek that to be. I don't have any skin in the game anymore as to what that is. I did at one point, but that's a hunger that's in the human heart. When we to connect with something beyond ourselves, because we are so profoundly mortal. And social scientists also define religion as a structure, an institution within which people seek the transcendent. People seek to fulfill their spiritual needs. And so religion would be churches and parachurch organizations and synagogues and mosques and those more traditional, more formalized expressions of spirituality. And I evidence would suggest, and my own experience would bear out, is that that abuse creates profound spiritual wounds, but survivors still have profound spiritual needs. And very often what they reject is not their own spiritual needs, because we know our own hungers. We're familiar with what it means to hunger and thirst. We're just tired of drinking from poisoned wells. So very often survivors will reject the religious structures because they're so messed up. And even the Christ who we all purport, or many of us purport to serve, said exactly the same thing. So I just wish we'd all just be able to get real honest about how religion across faith domains has been poisoned, and that spirituality has been so deeply damaged as a result. It's very difficult then to get your spiritual needs met in a toxic system. And so we have a lot of cleanup to do. And what I think what I want out of that conversation or let it out of that point is to recognize that if people don't accept your version of the institution, your religious expression of spirituality, it doesn't mean they don't spiritually hunger and thirst. Just clean up the water so they can drink, clean up the food so it isn't nasty, and then let them choose, because that's what the eternal does, is honors free will and choice. And what abuse does, and it does so perfectly, is destroys free will, choice, and voice.
I think it's extremely profound, and maybe we could just do a little excursion to some of the poison we see in the religious structures. Um, I mean, one of the poisons that has really bothered me is we have to compromise integrity for the sake of growth, and data becomes the measure of spirituality. And so, if there are more people coming, that means the pastor is a man of God. Uh, you know, if the downloads are increasing, that means the Holy Spirit blessed it. Um, and this leads to image management instead of vulnerability. And what image do the targets, the audience, what are the audience expectations, and let's give them that rather than let's love them, let's give them truth, let's be good. And if that, whatever the impact of that is immaterial to our calculations. Faithfulness is the clean well. Um, and that I just think that the imagination for religion in America has been shaped by the megachurch, and megachurches can do great good. Um, I'm not opposed to larger. I don't think larger means evil either. Um, but that's one of the poisons I see is when moral compromises are made, which cause harm because the heart wants big. And so the religious professionals choose growth over righteousness.
Yeah. I wish, Carson, that was exclusive to the religious domain, but it isn't. It's also in the advocacy world, it's in healthcare, it's in medicine, it's in the military, it's in fashion, it's in TV, it's in radio, it's everywhere. It's a universal problem, and it's troubling that it's also a universal problem in faith communities. Um, the one phrase that I think, the only comment that I have, and I think there are people that are much better versed in this than I am, but the best remedy for bad theology is good theology, and I think we make theology incredibly complicated when actually the Christ made it incredibly simple. And so, but most people have difficulty with the complexity of life and the simpleness of faith.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm just processing all of that. Yeah. So let me bring us to our next question. One of the things that's been really disorienting for me uh, post RZIM have been the setbacks. When I first left in January of 2021, I knew I was out. I mean, I could hardly function, and the first 3 months were particularly just kind of very low function and really struggling to be present to my family and to other people. And then there was a season of I'm getting better, and then there was a season of fighting an NDA, um, and then there was a season of being better, and then you know I think we've joked about this that sometimes it's when we're on vacation that we hear something else that is just a bombshell, and it's another moment of like I'm back to where I was 6 months ago or what have you, and another week it feels lost to the pain of it all. Um, And so these seem like not just the spiritual wounds of abuse, but the spiritual scars. And I wanted to invite you to share about the depth and the duration of the recovery process.
Thank you for sharing. Um, you said it's 2021 that you left?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. The early days yet for you. That's only a year and a bit, right? Took us a year and a half to get stable. Like, when I mean stable, I mean like not falling off any cliff emotionally, anymore. Um, where we were certain we were going to survive, not only individually, physically, but corporately. And sometimes it can take longer. Establishing safety and stability is the first sort of step in the recovery process. Judith Herman refers to this in her book Trauma and Recovery. It's still the most, in my mind, the most seminal work on trauma and recovery. Tough read, but you can get through it by stages. And then she talks about the next stage is grieving and remembering. And when you go to when you're going to your therapist, you're kind of really working through that sort of second stage, while still circling back. Am I stable? Am I stable? Am I safe? Am I stable? Am I safe? Grieving and remembering. Oh, that's too much grieving and remembering. Gotta go back to stable and safe.
Yeah.
And it's true. It's true. And then the third stage that she talks about in her text is reintegrating back into society. For me, this is integrative. This is hard. I'm going to the Restore conference in a little while, and I don't do these things. I keep saying these things, but that I don't do these things, and then I keep doing these things because people who helped me asked, and I feel I should show up for you the way you showed up for me. That's why I came here today. That's why I'm going to the Restore conference. And so there's a cost to this. I, like you, will hit things I don't realize until I'm in the middle of them. So I was cranky with my husband last night at dinner, and then I went to bed and I cried for what felt like a really long time, but nobody really cries for a really long time. I sobbed and sobbed and sobbed, and eventually, whatever, 1 o'clock in the morning, I went to sleep, because it just, this sort of thing rips open grief, right? I have to, if I'm going to show up for the survivors who are listening, if I'm even going to show up for you, you're going to show up for me, we're going to have to show up as true, or it's just going to be stupid. We might as well stay home, right? And to show up authentically is painful. This isn't so easy for me that it doesn't cost me big. It does. So that's part of it. And I think the other part is that, initially, at least for most people's recovery, ours included, it was like 0 steps forward, 30 steps back, 2 steps forward, 5 steps back, and it kept going. So eventually, we kept the ground we gained, and that was where we were safe and stable. And then, we would eventually take a step and keep that ground. It's a lot longer process than I think that I wanted it to be. I remember Diane Langberg saying in one of her talks that, recovery is a 3 to 7 year process. And I was like, what? I can't be doing this like this for 3 to 7 years. But the reality is like birthing a baby. You have a couple of babies, you and your wife, and you're only in transition, which is the hardest part of labor, for a really short period of time. The rest of it, you can have a snack, a joke, and maybe a little nap in between, or you can sleep through some of it. Recovery is an awful lot like birthing something new. That you're going to be born new again, and it's going to be a new you, and it's going to be a you that's wiser, more gracious, more beautiful, maybe definitely more scars. But it's in the scars, and it's your scars that you bring this conversation. It's in my scars that bring this conversation. It's in by wounds, and not our own, but by his wounds we are healed. And so there's a power in that. There has to be, when we show up with our wounds, and we don't spread the wounds around, but we at least acknowledge them, and we give them time to heal, and the right environment to heal in. There's an inflammatory process. There's a healing process. There's a process where you poke it and the skin is covered over, but it still hurts like a son of a gun. and the scar will be there, and there's a time where that scar becomes incorporated into your identity. Yes, this is part of what happened to me. This is part of who I am, but it's not all of who I am. And those things come. Yeah.
Lori, and it just a little overwhelmed by the cost of this for you, and I think anyone who sees this will feel very touched by your courage and the gift you're offering. Um, and I told you that I don't know why I reached out, except I couldn't not reach out. I just kept getting prompted over and over in my heart, like I should reach out and see if this is something um, that we could do. And I just want to honor you for being here. And this is a gift to so many people. Um, and so I hope that the cost will be um, worth it in the sense of the way this offers some kind of connection and belonging to others. Because there was a time when the setbacks, I was angry with myself that there was a setback, that I wasn't strong enough, that I hadn't done enough work, that I hadn't read the right books yet, that I couldn't be present with my own family or be present with people in other contexts because of this. And I was really hard on myself, and I'm starting to be a little more accepting. Um, but even that is a part of the uncovering process.
Yeah.
Um, and people say there's some kind of a cottage industry here, and we're probably doing this for a lot of profit. I haven't seen the lucrative riches roll in from this. Um, you know, it's more the cost that compounds as you go see your therapist again, or you
Mm-hmm.
have another night where you're mean to your husband, or something like that, or you can't sleep.
Mm-hmm.
One other place of honesty we wanted to touch on is when we realize that we've been carrying wounds we didn't know about. Um, I'll have a conversation with my therapist or my wife or someone at church, and uh, I'll realize, oh, there's something else that needs healing. And we've done that in real time in an uncomfortable way in this conversation. As you said, hey, Carson, can I just draw your attention to something you're still working on? Um, and I don't think either of us could have borne seeing how much recovery we had. And again, you've been through a lifetime of this. This is a very recent thing for me, and very different kinds as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but what is it? What is it like to realize again and again, oh, there's more wounding here that I need healing for?
Um, I said earlier that my role in the survivor community is multifaceted, mostly peer, sometimes a mama, um, and my kids have taught me so much about recovery and life and reality. And one of the things that when I see something in myself that is something I don't like, or an area where I'm not yet who I want to be, for whatever the reason, um, I have a great deal of self compassion these days, and I think I have most of my life because I see common humanity, including my own. And so when I see something in myself that needs growth, I basically just try not to panic anymore. I used to panic and be like, can you believe this? This is wrong. And then, can you believe I did that? And or I said that, and I thought that. How could I have thought that? How could I have told that to other people? And lost, really gotten upset about what really was a long-standing issue. And so anymore, I feel like the best approach in my own life and with the life of others is like, deep breath. This has been here for 45 years, or however many long. And it's probably not going to, need me to rip it apart in 45 minutes. And it will unfold. I think I've become better at allowing an unfolding, and I'm very careful who I bring my common humanity to in real life. I try to be as human as possible on social media. But I also have a very small sphere of people that I actually talk to in real life. Probably my lawyer and my therapist and my husband, and periodically a group of you and your colleagues if something's really making me mad, where I might cuss or chew something out. But otherwise, it's just small, and you take baby steps, and you go, and you have to be able to see your own developmental self as somebody who's in progress, because how you treat yourself will actually be how you treat others. And if you're not treating yourself the way that you treat others, then at least be congruent. You know, if other people are allowed to grow, develop, and become, then I'm allowed to grow, develop, and become. If other people are allowed to change and recover and be restored, then I'm allowed to change and recover and be restored. If I want my kids to go through a maturation process, then I better be prepared for my own maturation process too.
Yeah. And that means that it's okay that we're not yet compassionate with ourselves. That's practicing that compassion to say, I wish I was more compassionate for myself, but it's okay that I'm not there yet. And
Yeah,
I'm going to be where I am today.
absolutely.
And Lori Anne, I think if I understand your story correctly, and of course correct me, I mean, it would have been nice to be known as a physical therapist, as a wife, as a mom, as a friend, and have that be it. And through no choice of your own, now one of your identities is overcomer. Um, and I wanted to ask um, what it has been like for you to integrate a sense of self after trauma and given you a new sense of self that you are at peace with or even pleased with.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. By way of preface, I was born into trauma, so my personality and my personhood was shaped by trauma, which means that people who are born into adverse childhood experiences and can't escape them until adulthood don't escape them in adulthood. They just go with you. Um, and parts of my person were profoundly underdeveloped, profoundly naive. Um, very much wanting to be a daughter to anybody, wanting, I wonder what the church had to offer in terms of bestowing identity, in terms of telling me who I was. That's part of Christendom, is right. You're a child of God. You're a brother and sister in Christ. You're in the family of God. You have value. You have purpose. You have meaning. You belong to God. I mean, all of these are things that Christianity across its many dimensions would have to say. And so when you fashion and form an individual, people whose lives have been truncated by trauma might be able to incorporate the old, and then they have to deal with the trauma, and then they would be able to uncover the old self with their now post-traumatic self. For me, I actually don't know that I had much in the way of personal individual agency until my early 40s. um, and it probably took being globally hated, um, vilified, and hung out to dry before I realized, oh, gee, um, I don't, I'm not much of a person inside. And what I mean by that is that I would be whatever anybody wanted me to be, very
Mm,
chameleon like. And it's not that I wasn't good or kind or decent. All the other things that I feel are good about myself now, they were good before. It's just that I would just pour myself into whatever mold somebody wanted at the time, because I didn't know who I was, so I had to be whoever you said I was, right?
mm,
And so um, through obviously through lots of therapy and coming to terms with what fashioned and formed me, I have worked really hard to become somebody that I could love and respect, and I do. I I think I'm pretty neat. Um, and a few really important people to me think I'm pretty neat too, and the rest, I at one point in this process, you know that Boz Chivijan and Brad and I are, and his wife, we're become good friends. And at one point in this, Boz said to me, when I was sending him an email saying, oh, look at all these horrible things people are saying about us. Can you believe that they believe this? And how can they say this? And how could they put this in a publication? He said, at some point, and this is, I wanted to punch him, and I'm a non-violent person. He said, at some point, you're just going to have to not care what other people are saying. And I was like, you have no idea what you're talking about. Do you know? And eventually I sat back, and it took me a long time, but I was like, yeah, you know what? He's right. As long as I can live with myself, then that's sufficient. And my kids really like me, and my husband does too, and I've got a few good friends, and that's sufficient. Does that make sense?
One of the participants just threw in the chat, "We think the world of you, Lori Anne." So,
Uh,
uh,
but
uh,
can I say one more thing? I don't want to keep anybody, but can I say one more thing, Carson?
yeah.
Okay, so when I first came to faith in Christ, I was reading stories to my now oldest daughter. She's 24, and it was a story from Punchinello. Max Lucado wrote those books,
Uh-huh.
and there was
With the
a
stickers.
girl. Yeah, there was a girl in one of the books called Lucy, or it means light. Anyway, in this particular book, the people in the community were, or the puppets were giving each other stars and dots, stars and dots, stars and dots. And the more dots you got, that's the bad thing. The more dots you had, the more dots you got. The more stars you had, the more stars you got. And I remember thinking, this was 20 plus years ago, thinking, I want to be just like Lucy. Like, here I am reading this to my kid, thinking, and I'm thinking as the adult, supposedly, I want to be just like Lucy. Nothing stuck to Lucy. The stars didn't stick to Lucy. The dots didn't stick to Lucy. People would come up and put them on her, and they would just fall to the ground because she knew who she was, and stars and dots didn't matter. And I feel like I've become like Lucy, but what a heck of a way to get here.
Yeah. No, I love that story. I think I've read that story to my kids. I do think that part of how we become like Lucy, though, is by letting some people give us affirmation.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that's one, I mean, that invulnerability to other people's opinions isn't one we can actually have.
Right.
And so we're very vulnerable if we don't have affirmation from people who are worthy of, um, our lives. And so that's the only tweak I would make, is that, finding that safe community that's stable is part of how we become stable. And then our stability can become a gift to others in that group.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I agree with you. I think that for many survivors, that's a really small group.
yeah,
And that's also really hard to find.
right.
And so knowing yourself and getting help and healing so you can discern what a safe situation is really important. Because if you, oftentimes we will put our hearts out there and not realize the red flags in communities, and then be wounded repeatedly again, right? You have to learn to self-protect before you can branch out. Does that make sense?
It
Very
does. And
far.
one of the uncomfortable realities that I've come to realize is I cannot perfectly self protect.
Right.
Um, I can't protect myself from death. I can't protect myself from sickness. I can't protect myself from accidents.
Mm-hmm. That's
Um,
true.
and I can't protect myself from being betrayed again.
True.
Um, but there's wisdom I can gain that makes it less likely. Uh,
That's also true. I think we may be coming from different circumstances in that you're it may be a gender thing. My husband's very similar. He's recently experienced an accident where he was at fault, and he's never at fault for anything because he's so conscientious that he doesn't screw up. In this case, he messed up, and it was a total accident, and it was really hard for him because he messed up. And I'm thinking, holy smacks, everybody has accidents. It's just a mistake. What's the issue? Whereas most abuse survivors, when I say you need to learn how to self protect, is because they, myself included, don't know how. So when your
mm,
no is never honored, when your body is never your own, when you're not even permitted to think your own thoughts, uh, that it's easy for other people to think thoughts for you, or to have at your body or any aspect of your personhood and tell you who you are. And so learning to close and lock the door is really important for people who don't even know there's a door, right? Just to share that with you, not in terms of not to correct you, because I think there's truth to both of what we're saying, just different contexts, right?
Yeah, no, and I'm so glad you brought that in. Well, Lorian, we wanted to be honest today, um, and I also know you wanted to offer hope amidst all the ways in which, in our very different life stories, we're still in process and don't have all the answers. So, as our last question today, um, what have you experienced as hope? Where do you look for hope? What has helped you become a hopeful person in spite of all that um, you have had to go through and start to recover from?
Hope is an ontological need. It means if we don't have hope, we don't breathe anymore. We don't live. We don't survive. And in order to continue to decide that you're going to grow and you're going to become and it's worth it, you have to have hope. And I feel like was born with a profound sense of there's got to be more than this. This can't be all there is. Um, and that has pushed me through. Also, I'm somebody for whom meaning is really important, and purpose, and finding very small ways. Once I was safe, stable, and enough to do so, to give something back to others has been really important to me, even if it's just in small ways. Um, Learning that what I say or what I can offer might make a difference in some small way to somebody. Um, that's been really profoundly meaningful to me. I'm still living like a Narnian, even if there is no Narnia. Um, and so, what remains for me is the hope of hope in the narrative of the triune God. Am I certain? No, but I have hope in that hope, if that makes sense. It's not meant to be at arm's length, but it's where I'm at right now. I think that a fair bit of us would do better with less certitude and more compassion.
Mm.
Um, and the people that I respect the most, uh, they hold out hope and a helping hand in equal measure, you know. And so, what I hope and hope for now. And I hope that doesn't sound too nebulous or ephemeral.
No, I think it's beautiful. Um, and I'm grateful for it. For me, um, every person's story will be different, and I don't want to give a false promise. But in our particular lives, this conversation and our friendship is, I think, a symbol that hope sometimes pops through and we get to experience it. And that to me is something really beautiful. And I'm not trying to say, expect this for everyone. That's the opposite of what I'm saying. I'm just saying, this is a monument of hope, today's conversation. And
I absolutely agree with you.
I'm grateful for that hope.
Yeah, me too. Thank you, Carson.
Lori Anne, thank you for the privilege of this conversation and the cost of it. And I hope that if you've listened, you found a sense that you're a little less alone and that you have some sign pointers that may be just a tiny bit of healing for you. That's my heart in this. If we got it wrong, I'm so sorry. But that was the the goal. Um, and thank you for listening. And look forward to connecting again in the future.
Bless you.